Hello, Collier County 4-H. Welcome to the companion video to the Sew It Seams class for making a hexagon quilt. So here you're going to see what we're going to be making. This is a bigger version. You can make anything from a quilt to all the way down to just one hexagon if you'd like. You just have to keep putting them together. Now I'm going to show you what we're going to be making in our class, which is going to be this little kind of flower looking thing here, but it's going to be like a coaster for your glasses, and it's going to teach us two stitches that are going to be main staples when you learn how to sew. We call the whip stitch, and just kind of learning how to knot and piece things together. So here you're going to see we have 7 hexagons, and these are what our hexagons originally start out with. We're going to make each individual hexagon together. And this is what the front and backs look like once we finished sewing them together here. And then you're going to need these little 4-inch circles of fabric to make these hexagons, and you'll need 7. Let's talk about the kind of supplies we're going to need for this project. So the first thing we're going to need is a 9-sharp sewing needle. It's important to have multiple because sometimes after a while sewing needles do get dull and you need to replace them. You'll also need some thread. Now any thread's going to do, but you want to try to find a color that corresponds with the color of fabric you're going to be using. That way you can hide your stitches better and it looks better in the end. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to be using a color of thread that contrasts so you can see my stitches better. Here we have some beeswax. Now beeswax isn't necessary, but I find it's really helpful for beginners because it helps kind of have the thread go through the fabric easier. It helps prevent knots and things like that. The other thing we're going to need are going to be little scissors or snips. Now the scissors are just going to be to cut the thread. They're not going to be really cutting the fabric out in this video. When you do cut your fabric out, you want to make sure to use fabric scissors. So just go ahead and keep that in mind. You're also going to need 7 of these 4-inch circles cut out of fabric. Any fabric you'd like, be creative. They can be the same color. They can have patterns. They can all be different, all be the same. That's the beauty of quilt making, is you can just let your creativity run wild. So again, 7 4-inch circles. The other supplies we're going to need is an iron and an ironing board or an ironing mat. Whenever you iron anything, you never want to hold it down like this. You always want to stand it up, and you always want to make sure when you're ironing to do it on a surface that is okay to iron on, like an ironing board or ironing mat. We are mostly going to be using the cotton setting because that's what most quilting fabrics are made out of. And whenever you have fabric, you want to make sure that you use the corresponding setting on your iron. The other thing about ironing is it's hot. So you need to make sure that you are careful around your iron to make sure you don't burn yourselves. Always unplug your iron or turn it off when not in use. So the first thing we're going to do today is go ahead, and if you've cut out your little pieces and they have creases or they're wrinkled, go ahead and we're just going to lay them all out and iron them flat. Now, this may seem like an unnecessary step, but I promise you guys that it's going to make the world of a difference when you sew, because if you leave creases in your fabric at any point in time, it could warp your project. It could make it just look not as crisp and pretty as you would like it to be. Or in this case, with these circles, we'll be making hexagons, so they could misshape the hexagons if we don't flatten them out. So that's what I'm doing here. I have it on the cotton setting. I've let the iron warm up, either beep or just let it sit for a minute. And I'm wiggling over those pieces of fabric just a little bit with some steam that you put in your iron, which is just water. And you just go over each one a little bit, and you just kind of go back and forth, and then you go to the next one. Now we need to go ahead and make our knot. in our thread. This will help anchor our thread onto our project and make sure that when we pull our thread tight, it doesn't pull all the way through, and it keeps that nice sewing in place. So you're just going to take your thread and get an arm width span of thread, and you're going to cut it off. Next, we're going to take that thread and we're going to run it over top our beeswax a couple of times. This is going to help coat our thread with beeswax. And like I mentioned before, the beeswax is really there to help kind of make things smoother for hand sewing. You don't want to do this to machine sewn thread, just hand sewing. So you run it over both sides, and then you make sure to go on the edge you're going to use to thread your needle, and you're going to do exactly like this. And guess what? That's going to help us thread our needle a whole lot easier. So go ahead and pick up your 9 sharp needle. And I've been doing this a while, so I don't need it, but if you need a needle threader to help you thread your needle, use it. We're going to thread our needle, being sure that when we thread our needle that we leave it loose, meaning that we're gonna not kind of put a knot on the end of our needle there just to keep it on, because it will not go through our fabric right. Sometimes it won't go through the fabric at all. The only knot we should have on our thread at any time is here at the end. You're just going to have to figure out a way to hold your needle so that the thread doesn't come out when you sew. So the first thing we do to make a knot is go ahead and take the tail end of our thread there and place it exactly as I'm holding it. Take the needle end, again placing it exactly as you see here. Now the first thread we put down, we're going to take and we're going to wrap it around our needle about 7 times like this. Then we're going to take one of our fingers to kind of hold that in place while we move our hands around, because we're going to make sure we keep hold of that wrapped around thread, pinch it shut, and as we're pinching, we're going to pull that needle through all the way through the end of the thread. And if you've held on tight enough and you've done it right, if you remove your finger at the very end, you'll have a knot. So make sure that if you need to watch that over again just to get it down. The next thing we need to do is make our hexagons. So we need to grab one of our 4-inch circles, fold it in half, fold it in half again to make a quarter circle. And this is going to help us find the center of the circle, so we can go ahead and put our thread through the center. Now if you have a piece of fabric that is patterned or is just not the same color on one side as the other, whatever side you want to look pretty, it needs to go on the inside. So this is called the face of the fabric. So the 2 faces of the fabric that look the best need to go on the inside. So you fold it in half, fold it again. Now you should only see the really ugly side facing you. Great. Once we have it folded into a quarter, we're going to go ahead and pick up our threaded needle, and we're going to take that needle and we're going to find the very tip of that quarter and just find the very edge of it and go through it just like so. Pull through all the way to the end of your knot. You're going to then unfold your circle so that it's back to its full shape. Wherever the thread is coming out of your fabric right there, go towards the top. Now, wherever it's going, you just find the very top, as close to the edge, but not at the edge, because you could pull through your fabric. So pretty close to the edge, you're going to go through with a very small piece of bite out of that fabric, and you're going to pull through again. You're going to keep pulling, and then sometimes you might have to hold the fabric so that it pins it down. Great. We're going to rotate our circle, and wherever that fold meets the other part of the circle right there, we're going to go ahead and find the very edge, poke it straight through like you did before, just a little bit of that fabric. You might have to finagle your thread so that it doesn't catch on things and that it doesn't become loose over time. You're going to pull down. If If you have to manipulate the fabric so that it folds properly, go ahead and do that. Increase it, and you should have your first point. Rotate. Again, where the fabrics fold and meet at the very tip, you're going to do the same thing. Small bite of fabric, pull on through. Watching our thread. Now we have our second point of our hexagon. 1, 2. Rotate again. Again, exactly as we did before, where the folds meet at the very tip right there. Very small bite out of the fabric, pretty close to the edge. Pull through. Watching our thread. Perfect. We now have 3 points of our hexagon. 1, 2, 3. Rotate again. Find that very edge again where it meets. Get a very small bite of the fabric, like we've done several times before, and pull on through. Make sure to watch your thread. Awesome. We now have 4 points. 1, 2, 3, 4. To make the last 2 points, you go to this very peak right here. Make sure that you can manipulate it so that it makes a nice sharp point for you at the top. And you take a small bite at the very tippy top there. And pull on through. Awesome. We've now finished making the shape of our hexagon. So we have all 6 points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So now we have to tack down our hexagon so that it stays in shape and doesn't unravel on us further down. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your needle and find the very center again and find those little folds. And just take little pieces as close to the center out of those folds and pull through. We're just essentially just going to go around. Keep going through all the little folds towards the center. Yep. Keep pulling on through. This is going to help it stay in place so that it doesn't come out later. The last one, you're going to go ahead and tack it down. And then we're going to anchor, which just means we're going to find a way to knot it so that it stays forever. Knotting is going to be a little bit different than how we knotted our thread. So let's go over that. We want to go here, find one fold, just go through one of them once, towards the edge, as close to the edge as possible, pull through, go through the exact same spot you just went through. Again, we're going to create a loop, like so. Make sure the loop comes very small. And what you're going to do first is you're going to go through the center of the loop with your thread, pull through once, but not all the way, like that. Go through the center a second time, pulling through, but not all the way. And go through the center a third time. If it gets warped like this, you can go towards the bottom and it kind of helps you figure out where you're at. And then pull all the way through. Perfect, you made a knot. You can stop there. I like to anchor a second time using a different method. Here, I'm going to go through that same spot again. I'm going to make a new loop, and then I'm just going to create a circle around my loop. Like, watch, like, go around the bottom of the circle. Make a second circle. And then I'm going to take my thread, and I'm going to go through my initial loop in the middle and just pull on through. I've now made 2 knots. To finish off, you're going to go in this little fold, but only through the little fold. You don't want to go through your whole project so that it shows up on the outside. We're just trying to hide the tail of our thread so that we can snip it, and that way our knot doesn't come out and we don't have thread dangling everywhere. So go ahead and snip off the tail of that thread. And if you flip it over, you shouldn't see what the tail of the thread you just put through. You should only see the very center of where we initially first started with the quarter of the circle. And you've made your hexagon. Once you've made all 7 of your hexagons, it's important that we iron them flat. So go ahead, after all hexagons have been made, we're going to lay them out on our ironing board or our ironing mat. Now if you look at your hexagons, they look puffy or warped, or they don't lay flat. So that's the important part of this process, so that we have a nice, neat looking quilt at the end. Once you've laid them out and you've preheated your iron, you're going to go ahead and do this. You're just going to wiggle them down for a little bit, using some pressure, up and down, some steam. Do it to the other ones. And then you're going to let them sit and cool in place until they're cool to the touch. That way they keep the iron that you just did. Once you've done that, you're going to pick them up, and I want you to look at the difference. So now once you've ironed them, they're nice and flat and crisp, and they're going to lay easier, and they're going to be easier to sew together as well. Now we need to piece together our quilt, and in this step we're just designing it, because you don't want to do it on the fly, because if you do that on the fly you might not like how you put it together, and you'd have to undo all the stitches. So here I'm just taking different pieces and I'm putting them in the shape that I want it to initially be in, and I'm going to see if I like how it turns out with my pattern. So I made a center. Now I'm going to put various ones around and see if I like that. Now in this example, you're going to see I did not like how my pattern turned out. So this is the important part of doing this. So now I'm going to move some around, see if I like it a different way. Nope, didn't like that. I know, let's put it together this way. Perfect. I like that a lot better. So that way, if you take a picture of it, you know exactly what your pattern's supposed to look like in the end. Now we get to put together our quilt. So you're going to grab 2 pieces. I usually start with the center piece and one of the outer pieces. So that's my center, this is the outer. I'm going to sew together at those edges right there. We don't want to put our pieces together this way, to where the nice sides are facing out. If you sew it this way, it will not look good in your end product. You want to make sure you sew them together with the folded sides facing outwards. That way we can hide our stitches later and our end product will look really, really nice. To sew these 2 together, once you have them folded sides facing out, you're going to put 2 edges together. Once the 2 edges are together, you're going to take your knotted thread. You're going to go through one of the folds at the very edge like so. Pull through. Now you're going to hold it so that you can look down at it like this. And you're going to find the very edge of where those 2 edges meet, and you're going to poke through both pieces and pull through. See how it made a stitch there? Now we're going to keep going down the line. You want to keep your stitches kind of close together. See how close together my stitches are? Again, go towards the edge and pull through. Watch your thread, it might want to not lay exactly where you want it. Alright, we're just going to keep doing that same thing. So again, close stitch together, pull through, watching our thread. And we're going to do that down the whole length of one of the edges of our hexagon. Don't forget to watch your thread. See how the distance between my stitches are not that far apart? That's what makes hand sewing so good. Makes a strong piece of fabric. Now this stitch is called the whip stitch, and any sewing you do, mostly on machine, if you have to finish with hand sew, this is the stitch you're going to be using to finish your project most of the time. So now that we've reached the very edge of one of those sides, and you see the stitches, that's what they should look like. We're going to go ahead and go to the very end of that edge there. Poke through one more time. You're going to find the other fold that we originally started with, but on the other end. Poke through like we did in the beginning. Pull through. Go through the exact same spot you just went in. We're going to knot. So we're going to make our loop. We're going to go through that center loop once, twice, 3 times. Now pull all the way through. You made a knot. You can make a second knot, that's optional. I do it. So again, here you can see it. Make another loop. Go around the whole bottom of the loop like that. Go through the center of the first loop and pull through. Go ahead and hide your thread through that little fold there, making sure not to go to the front of your project. We're just hiding that tail of the thread again. See? All right, we can snip it off now. That is how we're going to do every single edge of our hexagon quilt. So when you go ahead and pull them apart, which you see I'm doing here, that kind of helps flatten out the shape. And you'll see when I flip it around that it's going to look nice and neat. Now if you used yellow thread, you wouldn't really see it all that much. See, I used red so you could see it. Great. So the edge we just sewed, like I said, that's how you're going to sew every single edge of this hexagon. So when you put it together, you want to sew that edge and that edge. Every single edge that needs to connect needs to be sewn. And when you put them together, you need to make sure that the folded sides are facing out. Perfect. This is an example of how, if they're already attached, you can fold them and sew. So I want you guys to see exactly all the lines we need to sew in order to complete this project. Go ahead and sew each one of these edges so that you have one project. So sew that edge, all these edges need to be sewn. Once you've sewn those edges, your project should look a little bit something like this. I've also ironed it again one last time, and that's how nice and crisp it looks. All of the edges are sewn. The back is going to look like this. Nice. You can see all those edges are sewn. Perfect. You have your coaster. Congratulations. Thanks for joining us today to make our hexagon hand-sewn quilt. This has been Janine Haney, the 4-H Outreach Coordinator with Collier County 4-H. I hope you learned something and had a great time doing it.